It's not like you become mindful while you're practicing and then you don't have to do that while you're not. Actually, the real practice of mindfulness has to do with how you live your life now. And the only moments you really have to live, which is now. And then the only way you have to live, which is the way you're doing it right now. So for all of you, everything you've ever done in your life, like everything you've worked for, the dreams you have, the desires, the focus, the work with children, all your education, it's all brought you to this Alumni Center at the University of Rochester on April, whatever the date is today, I forget, 2018. It's actually led you to this moment, all of that. We rarely walk into a room or a situation or a moment with that orientation that actually this moment is the leading edge of my life. It's the moment in which we actually can make a difference, the moment in which we can experience whatever there is to experience, the moment that we can actually, I don't know, it's interesting we use the word educate others. I'm wondering if that's like the right thing that's happened, if it's more of an exchange or a sharing. It's the moment that we can share our wisdom and knowledge and our way of being with others and be shared with from them too. So it'd be really good for young kids to focus, because we often, I remember, we all probably had the experience, or maybe still have the experience, like pay attention, being told to pay attention, like, so helping someone learn those skills. I don't remember being taught how to pay attention. The way I like to put it, for me, it's been very true since I've discovered it, is that I think I'm leaving a little less of a weight of disaster behind me in my life as I drive my ship of my being through my life than before I started really, not before I started being mindful, but before I started really consciously trying to attend to these qualities, which again, I want you to know that it's like your endowment, it's your human genetic endowment. Mindfulness, it's not like you have to go anywhere and pay somebody to give it to you and make it happen. It's right there, right now, in this moment, every moment.
As fabulous as Mick is, and as interesting as my job is, my guess is that when he started speaking, or moments of that, you may have drifted away. And what? Even though I know we're fabulous, but it probably happened. So what I think of when he was speaking is I look at this like an educator, and when I started this work in the Webster School District, I thought first, oh my God, this is the best job ever, what have I done? Because how do I do this? And then looked at what he spoke of and the learnings that I had in my life with mindfulness as like the AP exam, right? And like in the scope of sequence of how we do this, like how do I backtrack it? Because I'm in kindergarten classrooms and in pre-K classrooms and in physics classrooms and in 7th grade classrooms. And so I'm throughout the district and thought if we want to get to the point where we can, let's say the silent retreat becomes like the mecca of all this work, right? What's the groundwork that we lay down for kids to be able to cultivate the ability to do that? And so, like Mick talked about this idea of being present, I use it with kids like saying there's an anchor into the moment. So I'm going to speak really practically to you about things that you can do in your own practice or in your classrooms at any level with that. So what I say to say kindergartners that I go in is that your mind is a boat, boats wander, they drift away, and you anchor them back. And there are different ways to anchor back into the moment. Breath, mindful listening, right? This attention to what's happening, the way your body feels. And so the idea that what we practice becomes stronger because the brain is a muscle. And just like the muscles in our body, what we practice becomes stronger with that. So let's do this. I love that I see you writing. It must mean I'm just as fabulous as Mick is. So put your pens down for a second. Feet on the floor, sit up in a comfortable position. You're all adjusting again. And let's just do a minute. And in this minute, with eyes closed, which is I suggest as well, give your attention only to the fact that you're breathing. And then if you have to redirect your attention because your boat is drifting. That's cool. Well, a minute of just giving your attention to that. It might be astonishing how long a minute is sometimes, right? But the idea is, how many times did you have to bring yourself back to, I'm breathing? Where else does your attention go? And so being very candid with kids at a young age, all the way through, that our minds wander. And what we practice, right? So this neuroplasticity of the brain, this idea that we can change the pathways so that we can direct our attention to something, is that practice of that. When I work with athletes, it's the same conversation. If you practice a skill, shooting, the wrong way, your muscles start to do that. Your brain is the same thing. So this really beautiful concept that what we practice becomes stronger. I watched a TED Talk because I'm obsessed with that. Shauna Shapiro gave a TED Talk, and she went to a retreat. And at the retreat, the monk said to her, "My dear, what you're practicing is frustration, anger, impatience," right? So when you think about all of those things that you might say, you know what, I wish I was more patient, I would ask you, where do you practice it? Because it doesn't just come up all of a sudden. This ability to be patient isn't like, wow, I just got there. Like when you're at a stoplight, are you freaking out? So practice it there. Practice it in the line at Wegmans when you're in line. And like one of my little 5-year-olds told me, the kindergartners, "Oh, Miss Ebert, my dad and I were in line at Wegmans. You know the line that you have to have 7 items? Somebody had 12, he says to me." My dad was not doing well. I said, "You should take a mindful breath," is what he said to his father. And this idea, I don't know, I think it went well. We haven't heard any complaints. But the idea is that if you don't practice and cultivate these things everywhere, how can you call upon them when you're highly emotional, right? And so in terms of the practicality of it, the breath can become an anchor. The sounds around you can become an anchor, because maybe all of a sudden when you were really trying to practice concentrating on breath, you're like, is that the loudest clock ever in the room? And your head kept going to that space. Or maybe you start to notice the way your body feels, and your body becomes an anchor. We say to put your feet on the floor with purpose, because it brings you here. And so Mick said that when you say, can you pay attention? Have you stopped and taught kids how to pay attention? And so now when I go into rooms, I say, all right, everybody take a breath in and a breath out. And they're right there. For like 3 seconds, they're right there. I got it. It's the language of sensations. So we start with the language of closed and open. Right? If you think right now about someone that challenges you a great deal, go ahead, bring them to mind. You got it? I have to say to 7th grade girls, don't say the name out loud. And their faces do this fabulous. And if the other person's in the room, they're like, really, they can barely contain themselves. But if you start to think right now about someone in your life that challenges you, what do you notice internally? Because something happens. Because mindfulness is presence of heart, right? It's showing up in a space from here, from this sensation. And so when I bring now to mind someone that you love, there's a shift, right? So the language of mindfulness. You're going to keep, I'm going to keep doing this like turn and talk thing, because I have to have people talk. Talk about with the people next to you, unless you're like, I'm over this person, I'm going to go up there. What is the language of mindfulness? What would you say the language, based on what I'm saying, what kinds of words would you hear someone speak if they were speaking from that space of sensations? Go ahead, talk about that. Because in that, between stimulus and response, there is space. And in that space is the power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. Don't be too impressed. That was the mantra of my studio for a year, so I said it all the time at the end of my yoga classes. But the idea is that there's a hand model of the brain that Dan Siegel does. And he talks about that, you know, the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, the spinal cord. And I did this once in a class, and the kids were like, and I said, it's a model of it. They're like, oh, because we thought the spinal cord was back here. So literal with it. This is a model of it. Okay, we're here. All right. So what happens is when you get in that space of heightened emotion and you flip your lid, which, right? That's that idea. So Dan Siegel, great hand model of the brain, teaches that. But what I have kids now say to me is, I just have, you know, a year and a half of anecdotal evidence. but it's powerful. They'll say, when my brother takes the toy from me and I start to feel this, I know what I usually do. They're not as profound with their language, but it's something like this, that I know I typically do that to him. Now I take a breath because I just felt something inside of me that let me know, uh-oh, you got about 8 seconds. It's like it's 8 seconds before it happens. Using visualization is very, very powerful. Putting them in a space with my athletes, when I work with athletes, we have 2 high schools, both high schools varsity teams. We do this work, and this idea of, your brain doesn't know the difference in physically doing something and sitting and visualizing it. And so you get that back to that what you practice becomes stronger idea. And one of the greatest lessons I've learned across the board is that, and I think we know this, but I have proven this in the work, is that when we are uncomfortable, the only goal is to get comfortable. And all of the flight, fight, freeze, and all of the ways in which we do that. And so being impatient is some form of discomfort, right? Like, I'm worried about this. A wandering mind is a worrying mind, and this mind is heading here and it's heading there, and I got to do this. And so what do we do when we're uncomfortable? That's a guiding question throughout all the work we do in the district. Because it causes all the problems, internally and externally. When you're uncomfortable, what do? And so that visualization of, this is me impatient. Wow, I can see myself as patient. I can feel that. I can notice that. There's just tangibly like a close to an open to that. And the work that we do in getting to know discomfort is actually some of the most powerful work, because when you get to know it, you can hang out with it, right? And I think it's one of the best examples of it before we go to our question session. Obviously mindfulness has its groundings in Buddhist principles. And one of my favorite stories is this idea of having tea with Mara. And what that is that Mara is this entity that just agitates Buddha, right? And Buddha invites Mara over for tea. And Buddhist people are like, what? Like, why would you do that? And the answer is, if I don't get to know this, how do I live with it? How do I encounter it? How do I navigate it from a very early age? If we can start to teach what we do with discomfort and find a way, and I'm not talking about, and I say this all the time to my kids, I'm not talking about when someone is emotionally or physically harming you. There's a huge difference that we have to speak of in these classes, right? But the idea is that when you are uncomfortable, if you are constantly trying to get away from it, we're not learning anything. And this work, and I could spend more time talking about it, but I won't, but the work in ACEs, how many of you have heard of that, adverse childhood experiences, right? And so there is this idea that with epigenetics, right, that you are born with who you are, and then there are these epigenetic markers that come across, and those markers point there and suppress or repress these genes, and the way that you respond to things comes from the environment that you lived in that has caused great discomfort. And it's not all like wild trauma, but mindfulness, a caring adult, proper sleep, proper nutrition, all start to shift that genetically. It's so powerful. But at the end of the day, it comes down to, what do you do when you're uncomfortable, and how do you respond to people from that space? And the whole work kind of swirls in that.